For the first time in the history of our planet, we're dealing with something called climate refugees. According to United Nations Refugee Agency in 2019, weather-related hazards triggered almost 25 million displacements in 140 countries. Research showed that without ambitious climate actions and disaster risk reduction, climate-related disasters could double the number of people requiring humanitarian assistance to over 200 million each year by 2050. According to NASA, in the US, by the end of this century, what have been once in 20-year extreme heat days are projected to occur every 2 or 3 years over most of the nation. Global sea level has risen by about 8 inches since the reliable record keeping began in 1880. It is projected to rise another 1 to 8 feet by 2100. This is the result of added water from melting land ice and the expansion of seawater as it warms. According to United Nations, Southern Africa suffered extensive drought in 2019. In contrast, the greater Horn of Africa shifted from very dry conditions in 2018 and most of 2019 to floods and landslides associated with heavy rainfall in late 2019. And the drought-prone sub-Saharan African countries, the number of undernourished people have increased by 45.6% since 2012. And this is according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Oceans are becoming more acidic due to the increased level of CO2 in the atmosphere, and this is causing a decline in fish populations. And I'm sure you can imagine the impact on the economy, health, and so on. What I just mentioned is just a small snapshot of what global warming and greenhouse gas effect is causing. In this slide, I'm giving you two messages. Number one, the carbon dioxide is actually a large portion of greenhouse gas emissions. So we're talking about carbon dioxide for two reasons. Carbon dioxide, as you see, contributes to close to like 76% of the total greenhouse gas emission. And the other reason is this is the gas that stays in the atmosphere for a very long time. And so that's the problem. This is what we're targeting, for in various industries to reduce the emissions. The other message, if I have to pick 4 industries and economic sectors in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions, I would go with electricity and heat production, agriculture and forestry, industry and transportation. In today's panel session, we're going to talk about the challenges related to policy, innovation, utility challenges, and science on electricity and transportation. Before we get started, I'm going to walk you through some housekeeping notes. If you do have any technical support, click on that question icon, and we'll have a technician assist you during this presentation. If you do have any questions for the presenters, there is a Q&A tab, and please submit your questions, and we will try to address as many questions as we can. If you do need a certificate of participation, there's an icon there for that certificate. So if you click on that, your certificate will be provided. And in 2 hours after the conclusion of this session, the recording will be available to you. So we'll send a link to all the registrants. This panel session is a joint effort produced by IEEE Power and Energy Society and IEEE Educational Activities. Hello, everyone. My name is Babak Inayati. I am the moderator of this exciting panel session. If you remember, I mentioned that to address the greenhouse gas emission reduction in the electricity sector, we need policy, innovation, utilities, and science all coordinating, collaborating, and talking to each other, and making sure that our plans are executable and feasible. So today I'm honored to let you all know that I have 4 top distinguished speakers with us today. Each specialize in particular in specific topics. However, they've been involved in various aspects of greenhouse gas emission reduction on the electricity sector. So this is going to be a very interactive session as we move on. We have with us U.S. Department of Energy Deputy Secretary David Turk, Professor Ronald Prynne, who's Director of MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change, Arshad Mansour, President and CEO of Electric Power Research Institute, Brian Gemmell, Vice President and Chief Clean Energy Development Officer at National Grid, and myself, Babak Inayati. I am the moderator of this session. The agenda of the session, I will have each panelist to give us 5 minutes of introductory remarks, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session. During Q&A session, so while the presenters are speaking, if you do have any questions, as I said, please submit them, and we'll try to address them in the Q&A session. And in the end, during the conclusion, each panel will have 2 minutes for their closing remarks as well. So our first speaker, of course, if we want to understand the concept of climate change, the impact on our life, and some questions like, why do we see like a snowstorm in Texas, and things are getting mixed up in terms of the weather patterns. We're seeing more and more frequent storms and so on. We need to understand the science behind it. And our first speaker will be Professor Ronald Prynne, who will educate us on what climate change is and what can be done to reduce the impact on our life. So with that, Professor Prynne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to focus briefly on 3 topics in my remarks. The first one is the state of the climate. Do data show that the forecasts that we made years ago, have they become a reality? I make the point that dangerous climate change is no longer just a concern for the future. It is happening today. The data shows the 16 warmest years recorded since 1880 have all occurred in the last 22 years. Each year, data shows hundreds of regional high temperature records are now being broken, while typically one or no low temperature records are recorded. As predicted, data shows that global atmospheric humidity is rising continuously with temperature, thus accelerating the warming. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and fueling more and more intense hurricanes and typhoons. As predicted, data shows the poles are warming faster than the equator, lowering the equator to pole temperature difference, changing the movements of severe storms, and making some of them slower and much more destructive for both floods and wind damage. As predicted, data shows Arctic summer sea ice is rapidly decreasing, thereby replacing a reflector of summer sunlight with dark, absorbing ocean water, and thus accelerating the Arctic warming. As predicted, data now shows that climate extremes, floods, droughts, and heat waves are intensifying and persisting longer. So indeed, the data now shows that prior forecasts have become a reality. My next remarks are going to be on the state of international treaty negotiations. We just have had the end of COP26, of course. Despite decades of framework convention on climate change discussions, data shows that greenhouse gases continue to rise. Global CO2 is now at levels around 415 parts per million, augmented by about 95 parts per million of carbon dioxide equivalents of other greenhouse gases. In 2020, data shows that China was the highest emitter, emitting about twice that of the second-place USA. However, their emissions per capita were about half those of the USA. Also, the USA, European nations, and Japan are responsible for about half of the accumulated historic emissions in our atmosphere. All these nations should be leading global mitigation efforts, but how should these differences be weighted, for example, between China and the US? Developed countries need to contribute much more to the poor developing nations to help transform their energy systems and enable them to become more resilient to the climate changes already upon them. At COP26, there was an understandable focus on whether the aggregate emission reductions pledged by nations will achieve the 1.5 degrees centigrade target. It's important to note that the sensitivity of the transient global temperature change to a given level of emissions remains uncertain and a challenge for scientists to reduce that uncertainty. As this uncertainty is lowered in the future, the pledges may need to change in response. So what happened in COP26 is by no means the last meeting on this subject. There is wide agreement that new clean energy systems needed to achieve the targets must be affordable, not just in California, but in Bangladesh, sustainable and equitable among nations and poor and rich people. My final topic, briefly to address, is the issue of multiple stresses in the Earth system. And this is a new data challenge. New understanding implies that phenomena we once investigated in isolation must now be studied together. Sometimes you can get the sign wrong studying them separately. Climate change, COVID-19, air pollution, including wildfires, human health, land and water use, national economies, and many, many more are now co-evolving and amplifying the overall physical transition and financial risks. The demand for continued and expanded environmental data on climate, air pollution, and biodiversity, and socioeconomic data on human health, economies, and trade is growing. New tools, including machine learning, will allow, hopefully, new discoveries about the precise relationship between these multiple data sets and thus guide efforts to define multiple multi-system risk metrics. In the MIT Global Change Joint Program and other institutions, there is now a new focus on multi-system dynamics and new metrics to describe these combined risks. I refer you to the website of the joint program, Global Change, all lowercase, no dots, then .mit.edu. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Prin. I'm glad you mentioned that the developed countries are actually contributing to close to like 50% of the greenhouse gas emission. And the impact on undeveloped or developing countries is actually more severe because of not having access to financial resources to battle this climate change, and it's impacting their lifestyle and food resources and so on. So thank you for your introductory remarks. All right, our second speaker is Deputy Secretary David Turk. I'm not sure if you can hear us. It looks like you had some audio issues, Deputy Secretary. Can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. Can you guys hear me okay?
Perfect. Yes, yes.
Good, good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us, and the floor is yours for your 5 minutes introductory remarks.
Well, thanks for having me here today. And we are experiencing some technical issues from my end. I'm actually logged in through a colleague's computer right now, and I think that means I can give my presentation, but I'm not sure I'll be able to stick around for the panel discussion given the technical challenges. But I'm more than happy to share some thoughts and hopefully set the scene for the discussion today. What I thought I'd do is just underscore from the Biden administration perspective, from the U.S. Department of Energy perspective, 4 critical ingredients that we need to have all 4 of these together to be successful on climate change in particular. And be great to hear if folks agree, disagree, and hopefully, again, setting a foundation for the discussion to come. First critical ingredient, and having just come from the climate conference myself, a critical piece is the goal-setting piece. And I think we've made some remarkable strides in recent years, in recent weeks, and recent months, and even in recent days at the climate conference on goals. Setting goals, not just the government, but the private sector investors as well. And certainly from the U.S. government perspective, hopefully everyone has seen the very ambitious goals President Biden has set for our country. So 2030, our goal is to reduce emissions 50 to 52%. 2035, it's 100% clean electricity. And by 2050, which is only 28 years and a few weeks beyond that, to get to net zero throughout our economy. Incredibly ambitious goals. Other countries are setting goals, 2050, 2030, companies setting goals. Incredibly important from a market signaling perspective, from a political ambition perspective. So one of the critical ingredients. The second key ingredient I would submit for your consideration is innovation. We have done a lot of terrific innovation work, including at the Department of Energy with our 17 national labs for many, many years, to reduce costs of these clean energy technologies. I will say and emphasize that the work on innovation is not done. We need lower costs for more and more technologies, especially as we get to some of the harder to decarbonize sectors. One of the most interesting pieces of analysis I did when I was with the International Energy Agency was something called the Tracking Clean Energy Progress Initiative. And what we did is we looked at our smart, super smart colleagues across the IEA who focus on different technologies, different sectors, look at all 46 of the different key clean energy technologies across not only the power sector, but across buildings, across transportation, key cross-cutting technologies as well. And give us a sense of which of those 46 technologies are actually doing what they need to do at the deployment numbers we need to have them at the cost levels that we need to have them at, to do their share to get us to the Paris Agreement climate targets. And what we found in the latest analysis on that analysis was only 6 of the 46 technologies we looked at were doing their share at the scale, at the pace we need them in order to be successful at the ambitious Paris Agreement targets. That means 40 different technologies. We need to do additional innovation. We need to do additional cost reduction efforts. This administration, our Department of Energy, has launched something called the Earth Shots, looking at those key linchpin technologies that we need to drive the costs down, not just a little bit, but a lot. Dramatic cost reductions. Our first 3 Earth Shots that we've launched, the first one was on hydrogen, reducing the cost of hydrogen, clean hydrogen, to $1 per kilogram within this decade period of time. The second Earth Shot was on long-duration energy storage, driving the costs down for storage over that 10-hour period, greater than 10 hours, 90% additional cost reductions. Keep reducing those costs so we can deploy storage at the scale that we need to be successful. And then the third Earth Shot that Secretary Granholm launched just a couple weeks ago with Secretary Kerry and others at the climate conference was on carbon negative technologies, direct air capture and other negative technologies, again, to drive the cost down of those key technologies that we'll need more and more into the future. So that's the innovation piece. That's the second key ingredient that I think is necessary. Third key ingredient is deploy, deploy, deploy. At the same time as we're innovating, we need to deploy like never before. This is something our Secretary Granholm, has focused from day one in her tenure as Secretary of Energy. We need to do a much better job as the government, being partners with the private sector, partners with state and local governments, to deploy using all our tools, using all our authorities. The good news there is we had a bill signing just a few days ago here in Washington, D.C. for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That bill, in tandem with the reconciliation bill that the Congress is still working on, has $800 billion for clean energy, for climate-related efforts. $102 billion of that would come to the Department of Energy to do deployment, to do big demonstration programs on hydrogen, on CCUS, to build out our transmission grids, to build resiliency into our grids like never before. Not just important for climate, but important for cybersecurity, important for reliability going forward. 102 billion of new authorities, new offices created to help deploy like never before. So that's the third key ingredient. And then the fourth ingredient, I think this is a very appropriate ingredient for this discussion certainly, is partnerships. There's not one government that's going to be able to do this by themselves. There's not one level of government that's going to be able to do this by itself. It needs state governments. It needs local governments. It needs utilities. We need entrepreneurs. We need companies, established companies, new companies. We need financiers. We need NGOs. We need a whole range of partnerships. And not just paper partnerships where we sign an MOU and feel good that we've done something. We need real partnerships. Partnerships that matter in the real world and working together to come up with the pathway for hydrogen, to come up with a pathway for 100% clean electricity. So again, these are my four key ingredients for your consideration. And again, happy to be part of this discussion. And unfortunately, due to the technical difficulties, I think I'll need to give my colleague her computer back. But it's been a pleasure to be with you all, at least to be able to present some thoughts and inject some thoughts into the mix.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Deputy Turk. Thank you for your time. And so I have one quick question for you before you give that computer back to your colleague. And, this is amazing. I took some great notes. In terms of goal settings, I do have a slightly challenging question for you. And that is, we talk about the years 2035, 2050, 2030. But I see less visibility over the plan and how to get there. And, what are the actions we need to take? What's that detailed plan? Do we need to have like more granular scale of, progress that we need to meet to get to that point? Can you please share your thoughts on that? If there are anything that I'm missing?
Yeah, happy to do so. And it's an excellent question. And I think what we need to do is, there's a lot of roadmaps, there's a lot of plans that have been out there, but what we need to do is have a process here within the U.S., not just the government, but with our companies, with industry, with financiers, with state and local, to make sure that we're all on the same page for a plan. Not that we're going to always see 100% eye to eye, but have discussions, test and poke and prod and say, okay, here's the hydrogen hub strategy. Here's how we build out the hydrogen economy of the future. And have others road test that. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Make adjustments along the way so that we're working with some visibility on the other pieces, right? It matters what the government's doing in terms of what the private sector is thinking about, what the certainty is in terms of our big demo programs. What are we thinking of doing on the demo programs, and how does that simulate broader investment in the private sector going forward? So we have spent a lot of time at the department on those kinds of discussions, that kind of road mapping, that kind of plans. But we'll need to do even more of that, especially now that we have so many more tools, so many more authorities in the deployment space with the bipartisan bill and then the reconciliation bill to come on that end. And then the only last thing I'd underscore is, and we need to move quickly. All the 2050 and 2060 and 2070 goals, and there was a lot of that discussed at the climate conference, will never come to fruition unless we make real progress now on innovation and on deployment. We need to do real projects, real planning, real policy that matters so that we move the needle now and allows us to be successful in our 2030 goal, 2035 goal, and 2050. So it's that near-term action that I would really put a premium on. And again, that's where the bills in Congress are so important, to give us that near-term funding, those new authorities to be a helpful partner, a better partner to all from the Department of Energy side of things.
Absolutely. And then that kind of highlights the importance of partnership as well, with those detailed plans. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Appreciate your time. And we are going to move into our next presenter. All right. Have a great day, Secretary Turk. So our next presenter will be Brian Gemmell. So Brian, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Babak, and on behalf of National Grid, good morning, and many thanks for the opportunity to attend this distinguished IEEE panel. Really building on the comments of Professor Prin and Deputy Secretary Turk, it is an incredibly exciting time in our industry. Climate change is that defining challenge of our generation. And I think we've just heard there, the next decade is really critical to make progress on those longer-term, broad climate challenges. So this morning, I'm just going to opening comments, just give a little bit of context about our backyard, specific to goals and ambition that New York and Massachusetts have, as examples of taking that from the highest level down, and what can they at the state level do. And I'm thrilled to be part of National Grid in these very progressive states. In New York specifically, climate is front and center, really, everything at all levels of the government. There were specific laws enacted in 2019 and 2020 that are really relevant to the clean energy and environmental targets that New York has. Just to give a little bit of context, and we've heard about the billions of dollars from the government, which is fantastic, you know, building that down for New York. I mean, New York is going to, over the next 20 years, try to interconnect 80 gigawatts of renewables. So that's a G, gigawatts. It's going to try and put in about 15 gigawatts of storage. It's going to try and have 100% electrification of vehicles, largely. Obviously, some on the heavy-duty side are going to have hydrogen. We're going to try and put heat pumps into the vast majority of buildings and only have gas as a means of heating a fairly modest sense of the building. So, you know, those are big numbers. In Massachusetts, there was acts developed in 2021, and their 2050 roadmap includes 99% carbon zero carbon electricity. It's going to have 40 gigawatts of new renewables, 5 gigawatts of storage, and very similar on the whole EV heat pump buildings and trying to electrify that. So we're advancing a lot in parallel. The states are working incredibly hard. We are boiling it down to what do we need to do in the next 10 years, more so in the broader decades. But we have a little bit of some conflicts that as a utility, we're in the middle of this trying to do everything for our customers in an affordable way. So what are some of those competing forces that we're dealing with right now? Our policymakers have just said have very aggressive clean energy goals. Great. However, our regulators are reluctant to let utilities invest to achieve the policy goals at pace and at scale because of the bill impacts that are likely going to be passed on to consumers. Our residential customers are philosophically in favor of clean energy, but not at the price tag. And our corporate customers, they expect us as a utility to be ready to help them allow to make their critical clean energy investments. We as a company, National Grid, have launched our responsible business charter in support of all of that, which is really enabling the energy transition for all. We don't want to leave anyone behind. We were a principal partner last week, last couple of weeks in COP, a huge event that we all took note of. Our commitments to our US customers that will be fair and affordable for all in this transition in order to also reduce our emissions. Full decarbonisation of the electricity and transport sectors are better understood. However, full decarbonisation of the heating, particularly in the Northeast, offers some unique challenges. In summary, this is a critical decade for climate change, not just in the United States, Massachusetts, New York, but globally. We have transitioned, our industry, I would say, has transitioned from reactive to far more proactive, and we're having dialogue about what are the assets that we need to invest in to allow this electrification happen in a timely fashion. The embracing innovation, collaboration, and multi-stakeholder engagement is critical to all of the above. And with that, thank you, Babak, and I look forward to Q&A in the panel.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I really want to highlight what you just mentioned, that, you know, utilities need to move from being that reactive, you know, like to be more proactive, be at the table, discuss their challenges, their vision, you know, with the policymakers, with the regulators and public, you know, with some, say, hubs that they can create, like people, like even, you know, public can go see the technology, understand the benefits. I always look at utility as the core or the center where policy, technology, innovation, and public understanding all come together. And utilities' role is to basically meet the needs of various sectors. So it's extremely important that you mentioned that, you know, transitioning from being reactive to proactive really is a big deal for you know, for this energy transition. So thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Excellent. And our last presenter is Ashad Mansour. So Ashad, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Babak. It's an honor and pleasure to be here today. We already heard about research and innovation quite a bit from the previous three speakers. Let me just point some perspective on the pace and scale of innovation and research that will be needed, the type of research that will be needed, and what would be one of the essential factors for success. So let me step back by looking at the past. 20 years ago, in 2000, 80% of world's energy that was used was fossil fuel. Since then, we have innovated, reduced the cost of energy storage, wind, solar. We have brought in more than 1,500 gigawatt of wind and solar in the globe. Guess what percent of fossil fuel energy is used in the energy today? It's 80%. So the innovation that we have done in the past 20 years and the innovation that we'll have to do in the next 20 years will be a scale of magnitude higher. Let me give you another example. You heard Assistant Secretary Turk talk about the US goal, 50 to 50% economy-wide reduction. So what does that mean? That means what we have done in the last 15 years in the US in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emission, primarily through coal to gas and wind and solar and energy efficiency, we will have to triple the pace in the 9.5 years life. So if you're looking at what is the pace and scale of change, that's 3x. So now, what type of innovation is needed? Because innovation has many shapes and forms. Innovation, Brian mentioned about regulatory innovation. In the near term, in the next 9.5 years, that would be the most important thing to do. So what are a couple of regulatory innovation that we should be working on? It's not science, it's economics, but it is important. We look at, if you're a customer and you look at an energy cost, your energy cost is not electricity only. It's electricity, natural gas, and gasoline. An average US household, $45,000 annual income, spends 10% of their annual income on energy. If we are to convert electrification of transportation, that average customer will net save $1,000 a year. Yes, the electric bill will go up. The gasoline bill will go down. So if you're looking at regulatory construct of affordability, you need to look at energy in an integrated way, not electricity, natural gas, gasoline, all separate. So that's just one example of innovation on the regulatory side. But innovation also takes place in advancing manufacturing. If you look at the last 20 years, what lithium-ion battery has done, what solar has done, what wind has done, that's really not innovation in new breakthrough. We're still using polycrystalline and monocrystalline photovoltaic cells. We are still using lithium-ion. It has been innovation in manufacturing, scale of manufacturing, automation. And that innovation happened because when solar was 20 times more expensive than grid power in 2000, we made a policy innovation that we would encourage deployment. And then if you look at the technology side, the key innovation that will be needed, even if you're successful, we will be in 2030. Let's say we have reduced emission by 50%. We have electrified transportation, or parts of it. We have electrified building. Now, how do you go to the next 50%? And that's where you can electrify the world. We have to figure out how to affordably and reliably create clean energy molecules from clean electricity and from carbon capture and storage. And that's the innovation that's needed, because we'll need to look at, maybe CRISPR is a technology that will not only change medical science, but CRISPR is a technology that will allow us to bring biofuel in a much lower cost at an affordable rate. Hydrogen, you hear about PEM electrolyzers. There is significant involvement and innovation in startup and other areas to bring the cost of electrolyzers down. So I think this is the decade where we supersize innovation that we would be needing in next decades. And at EPRI, we have worked with more than 50 energy companies. National Grid is one of them. And that's the Low Carbon Resource Initiative, which is advance the technologies to create clean energy molecules from clean electricity. So the natural gas storage that we have in the country for 3 months, the pipelines that we have, maybe they will be repurposed to carry another set of clean energy molecules. So that, I think, is the biggest innovation opportunity and challenge for this decade. So with that, appreciate the opportunity again. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Arshad. No, this was great. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. One clarifying question I have for you before we actually start the Q&A. The regulatory construct in U.S., of course, as we all know, is different than some other countries. So here we have the federal government and state government. When it comes to innovation and deployment, sometimes we see that the federal government policies are not, I would say, fully aligned with the state government policies. And that creates a little bit of confusion for innovators and some utilities that want to deploy these new technology. They're dealing with separate set of rules that may not be 100% aligned with one another. So what are your thoughts on, or some recommendations, when Brian mentioned this regulatory innovation. So what are your thoughts on how this, I don't want to call it misalignment, but this, not 100% alignment can be resolved in the next decade, because we do need that.
Well, I think it's all local in terms of whether you're public power, whether you're investor-owned utility. It's the local stakeholders, whether it's NARUC or whether it's your stakeholders in public power. They'll really have to work together. And we just have, as a utility, as an industry, we just have to change the thinking. So, for example, another regulatory innovation. How about helping that average $45,000 customer who doesn't have access to charging infrastructure? And it may not make economic sense today to build a charging infrastructure, but actually do that now in anticipation of EV price coming down, first cost parity, because otherwise that constituent, that group, will never enjoy the benefit of electric transportation. It's not just a developing country and developed country. Within a very developed country like US, you have significant disadvantaged communities. And this just transition, I think utilities with innovative regulatory models, that's what we did in 1930. It didn't make any sense to build a 100-mile-long distribution line to serve 4 farms, but that's the Rural Electrification Act, because we as a society decided that electricity is a better form of energy. We as a society will need to decide electrification is a better form of transportation and build the infrastructure now so that the disadvantaged community, the lower and average income household, have access to what would be the most significant opportunity of reducing energy cost and reducing emission that we can do this decade through electrifying of transportation.
Perfect. Thank you. Fully agree with that. Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists for their introductory remarks. It's very informative. So we do have about, I should say, 15 minutes for a quick discussion. And a couple of things that I want to highlight and briefly touch on. Number one, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And we do have Professor Prin with us, who was the author of one of their reports. So I'm going to ask Professor Prin to please educate us on what these, the IPCC reports are, and what is, I would just say, trying to phrase it right, are there non-binding type reports that, we just publish for like education purpose, or there are some discussions in the UN level to make sure that actually the developed countries, at least, they commit to the recommendations of those reports. So, Professor Prin, I think you're muted.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, these are reports that are written under the auspices of the United Nations and the World Meteorological Organization. They're approximately once every 6 years that they do this. and there's a secretariat that runs the IPCC. Scientists are selected from around the world, and there will be several thousand that get involved in each of these assessments. The most recent one has just come out earlier in the spring of this year. And I would say that looking at what you asked about binding and non-binding, they really are scientists giving advice on the climate issue, and particularly on all of the science issues, as the basis for policy decisions made within the Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it is the Framework Convention that ultimately is responsible for getting at least pledges, if not binding, international treaties. So it's scientists giving their best shot at advice. Is warming occurring? Some of the things I mentioned in my brief 5 minutes earlier in this panel. Those are the things that are assessed. I was involved in particular in the 2007 report, and I look now at what's happened, what's come out in 2021, and all I see is pretty much the same forecast, only more dire, more close, and a greater sense of how much damage is done by climate change. And all of that's improved. It isn't just the scientists, it is social scientists who are involved as well. So economists get involved, and people assessing technologies get involved in the IPCC process. But it isn't binding in the sense of a treaty, or at least a set of pledges like the Paris Accord. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So Brian, Professor Prinn mentioned these recommendations by the experts as the IPCC, and some governments, of course, take some of those recommendations into action, set up some goals. So my question for you is, you talked about, high-level utility role and setting those goals, being active in the participations, and let's go into a little bit more details on what National Grid is doing right now, and what's the plan in the near future. I should say something that you can share with our audience on some of the innovative work or to bring in new capabilities to the company, plus the technologies that we think should exist for the utility business to better manage our assets and also expand on that. So if you do have any thoughts on that, or like detailed approach, we'll be happy to hear from you.
That's a big question. So I'll try and do that succinctly given time. But yeah, I mean, I mentioned before about the proactivity. So that from an innovation perspective, we just submitted last week in New York our filings, the first phase of the work that we need to do in order for New York to help achieve its 2030 ambition, which is 70% of the generation coming from renewables. And so that's proactive. We're moving ahead. The generation doesn't exist. It's in the various forms of queues, but we've done that. That'll allow, I mentioned the 80 gigawatts. Well, that's going to help interconnect approximately 10 gigawatts of upstate resources, and it'll increase the transfer capacity of the existing transmission in our backyard by 3,500 megawatts, which statewide would help reduce overall emissions by 2.5 million tons per year. So that's an example of proactivity. On the electric vehicle side, as another example, we're getting ahead of the curve with the number of charge points. We're already ranked just behind California, which the work that we've done in charging and what we plan to do, but we've got much more work to do that across our sector. And we're being innovative in the sense that we're now beginning to leveraging what the UK has done with the green print of having a full plan to allow the decarbonisation of the transportation sector, looking at the highway charging and fleets. We talk of disadvantaged communities. Fleets are a big part. They represent about 5% of the vehicles on the road. but they represent the 30% of the emissions of all vehicles on the road. So the Amazons, the UPSs, all these fleet, they're moving and they'll be taking their federal dollars. So we have to help them. And typically the yards of these fleets are in disadvantaged community backyards. So that's a little bit of the proactivity work that we're doing, be more specific. But you reference assets, you reference the networks that we have, and we are enabling this electrification transportation. Innovation around storage has been referenced. Arshad referenced that, moving to not just from 8 hours, but moving to long term of days, weeks, and perhaps seasonal change. So a lot of work going on the storage front, which will be an enabler. We're also looking at the information that we get from our assets in real time, with instrumentation and data coming from the field, looking at online of monitoring equipment to get more out of it. So the whole asset management, prudent investment, managing that with risk. I could go on at a long time, Babak, on that subject, but it's an incredibly exciting time, and then we've got lots of investments to do, and all forms of innovation will be a part of that. And I've just scratched the surface on that, honestly.
Thank you. Oh, absolutely. And I think, the success of the innovation work that you mentioned is, it's not going to be just one utility doing this, like collaboration with other utilities through organizations like EPRI, to make sure that there is enough knowledge share. We learn from each other, because we don't want to keep repeating the mistakes, so we want to learn and avoid those mistakes and move fast with the large-scale deployment of innovative solutions.
Just on that, just one comment. There is no silver bullet. Yes. We talk of microgrids, transmission, large-scale, small-scale, medium-scale transmission, all of the above. There is no silver bullet. This is a significant challenge that we all have to embrace. It will involve a lot of effort.
Right. Thank you, Brian. So there's one question submitted from the audience that I'm going to actually ask our panelists, all of them, to quickly touch on that. What is the role of nuclear energy in meeting these clean energy targets? So we'll start with Professor Prynne.
Yes, this is a very good question. Nuclear, of course, has a public perception that about what it is that is unfortunately making it less desirable. But my own view of this, and certainly work that we do in the Global Change Joint Program at MIT, you really do need to keep nuclear power on the table. And as one of the things that are essential almost for electric power, which is electric power without it being, it's continuous. You turn it on and it is continuously available. And if we are to move away from fossil fuels, I can't see a road to the future, say, to get 1.5 or 2 degrees target achieved. I can't see right now a road to the future that doesn't keep nuclear as a part of the energy mix for generating electric power.
That's interesting. To me, it was kind of, I know we've had some incidents in the past, but it hasn't been many to kind of make the safety a huge deal. But the managing the waste, I thought it's still costly. So there can be some innovation there and keep that cost down as we consider nuclear in the equation. I mean, that's my just personal thought, but I think that will be helpful as well. Thanks, Professor Prynne. So Arshad, please go ahead.
I think what the professor said was exactly right. I would say one step ahead. It's not just keep nuclear option on the table. We are actually seeing very exciting, I would say, developments within the U.S. and outside the U.S. on this reimagining this next generation nuclear. Before this decade is over, even just in the U.S., we will see 3 full-scale deployment of an SMR, small modular reactor, but more importantly, a micro reactor the Department of Defense is working on. It's a 5 to 20 megawatt reactor that can make our bases and military bases more resilient. And then you have the third thing that we will see is a non-advanced light water reactor, high temperature molten salt, high temperature sodium. And these flexible reactors are one of the key tools beyond this decade because they can produce steam, hydrogen, electricity in a completely flexible way. That is what a high temperature molten salt reactor does. And we will have a fully deployed reactor, all 3 types. I think large 1,000 megawatt, 2,000 megawatt plants, it's happening worldwide. It is more needed for developing countries. You know, the Professor Prin talked about Bangladesh. That's where I grew up. You don't have the land for wind and solar. You don't have the geological foundation for carbon capture and storage. You really have very few options. One is nuclear, and they're actually moving forward. And the other one is transmission to bring the hydro that you see in neighboring states. So I think nuclear as a multi-energy solution, large nuclear power plants like we have in US that will help developing countries that doesn't have the wind and solar option, I think will be key for this transition.
Excellent. Fully agree. Brian.
Just that as a wires and pipes company, we are agnostic to the brand of the electron that's coming onto the grid. But I completely agree that this future, that we have to have those types of discussions. In the Northeast, sun only shines usefully 20% of the time, land-based wind 30% of the time, offshore wind 50% of the time. You do all the maths, we have to have operational resilience of other forms of energy and interconnection, demand response, energy efficiency. All of these will come into play to provide reliability and resilience 24/7. And we're going to need it all.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. All right, so we received so many questions from the audience that unfortunately we won't have time to address all. I apologize because if we had limited time, it was a great discussion. I really learned a lot myself. And so what I'm going to do, we have about like 5 minutes. So I'll have each panelist to give us, their couple of minutes closing remarks, and then we'll conclude the session. So we'll start with Professor Prin.
Yes, I wanted to bring up the subject of beyond the electricity sector, that there are tough to decarbonize sources of energy in our sectors in the world. Aviation is a big challenge to decarbonize. Shipping, very large ships between across nations, and long-distance trucking. And we've got to think of ways of handling that as well. It would be wonderful if electric power could be used, for example, in long-distance trucking. But at the moment, I think it should be kept on the table. But at the moment, it doesn't look particularly feasible. And of course, aviation, electric power is not likely to provide the solution. And in very large ships, transocean shipping, those are new challenges that have got to be met, new fuels. And there's talk of hydrogen as being one of those fuels, which is a secondary fuel, of course, produced perhaps with electric power, but those tough to decarbonize sectors have to be kept in mind. I'm confident that the electric power sector can indeed become totally decarbonized in the not too distant future. So let's keep in mind that other challenge we have. Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of this, speaking of aviation, I was reading an article about this COP26 conference, and it was mentioned that, the conference carbon footprint for the greenhouse gas emission actually for the conference was higher than the previous ones in Madrid and other cities in the past. I know that they talked about, yes, they're investing in carbon capturing technologies, so net zero is still, the target. But aviation was a big piece of that equation. It was like many people traveling, flying to the event, and that basically contributed to that, the challenge in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But fully agree with your closing remarks, Professor Prynne. So we'll go with Brian.
It's an incredibly ambitious journey that we're all part of. We need to be having these tough conversations, and I compliment the IEEE for putting this panel on. We as engineers and scientists, we understand the problem statement, but we've got a huge job to do to educate the masses, the public, the politicians, regulators, etc. And I encourage everyone to engage in those tough conversations, to bring it real, because we've heard from the other panelists that it's easy to talk about 2040, it's easy to talk about 2015, even someone mentioned 2070 earlier. Let's bring it home. What do we need to do now? Because it's already, if our industry doesn't move fast, we need to engage public, landowners for in economic development, for siting, lots of issues, creation of jobs. And resources another, but who's going to deliver all this work? There's already a shortage of engineers, linemen, electricians, etc. So we need to be having a holistic, hard conversation about bringing it real. So thank you to everyone, and back to you, Babak.
Thank you, Brian. And Arshad.
No, just quick, agree with everything. I think I'm going to take Brian's near term to even more near term. Here's what we got to do globally in the next 2 to 3 years. If we cannot, we will not be able to meet even the 2030 goals. And what we need to do is think differently in terms of, and I'm going to say some words that means in the electric sector, resource adequacy and planning. Because if reliability and affordability is impacted, and customers will revolt against this new energy transition. That's what happened in Texas earlier this year. That's what's happening in Europe right now related to natural gas price, energy price. And it's not because we have wind and solar. It's not because gas didn't work in Texas. It was because our planning and resource adequacy did not take into account the weather is already changing. It did not take into account common mode failures. It did not take into account in Europe that we may have a wind drought just like we have a hydro water drought. And that's the wind drought we are seeing that was not in our planning framework. So once again, collaboration, NERC, EPRI, NREL, and more than 2 to 3 dozen utilities are together on this resource adequacy challenge. But that's not a 10-year goal. We got to fix that, and we got to fix market in the next 2 to 3 years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Arshad. I fully agree with what you just said. All right, so we're at the top of the hour. I really want to thank our panelists. I know they're very busy, and they really thank you for your time. And I hope you enjoyed this Tech Talk. Our next session is going to be on electric transportation. The date and time to be determined. You will be notified via our social media. So with that, well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day. Take care.